All right. We are live with Christos Makridis. And this is Matthew Nielsen. I'm the founder and board chair at the Educational Freedom Institute. We're going to give people just a couple minutes here. We're going to do a little chit chat with Christos before we dive into the conversation. We also have to give Corey a little grace period here. It's burning out quickly, though, isn't it, Christos? Like, we're 3 minutes in, and Corey isn't here. He'll get here. He'll jump on. But we'll give people maybe a minute more. We've got a good group of viewers on already, but we'll let that build up a little. How's the weather in DC? I'm not in DC, Christos, so let's talk about weather until Corey gets here.
Always a safe topic. There's some clouds in the air. No real rain though, but apparently one of my friends that was driving through North Carolina, there is that storm in the Hurricane Sally. So fortunate that it's not too stormy here, just a little bit of clouds.
Yeah. I was just in North Carolina. In fact, I got back last night.
Oh, wow.
And narrowly missed the rain. But yeah, it's coming, right?
Yeah. Well, growing up in Arizona, I love clouds. It's like if there's too much rain, then it gets a little bit of a nuisance because then it's like hard to get from place to place. But I've always loved the clouds. It's like, you get tired sometimes of the sun. You're like,
yeah, exactly. Especially being in Arizona for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, we got a good group watching, so let's get rolling. And Corey will join us when he can. So, again, my name is Matthew Nielsen. I'm the founder and board chair at the Educational Freedom Institute. Welcome to In Conversation, podcast from our nonprofit organization where we talk about education policy, practice, and everything in between. So, I'm joined today by our special guest, Christos Makridis. He's a research professor at Arizona State University, digital fellow at MIT, a digital fellow at Stanford, and a non-resident fellow at Baylor University. He has maybe the longest list of affiliations of any guest that we've had on the show, Christos. You've got your schedule full. Your calendar has got to be overflowing.
Well, it is a little bit busy, but it doesn't feel like it's. It's just you're always working, always producing, and I absolutely love it. So it's a joy to be with you and get to know you, Matt. And really grateful for your invitation.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for jumping on. So the first thing that we always ask all of our guests, Christos, is tell us a little about yourself and a little about why you're interested in education.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Arizona, so we've got already so many commonalities. I went to undergrad at Arizona State University and really developed a passion for research. And the part of research that I really love is that you get to create. You're able to draw different things together, data points that sometimes look a little bit disparate, but when you bring them together, they're able to tell a cohesive narrative. And so I really love building things. And just like an engineer gets to build something maybe physical, as social scientist and as a computational social science, I get to build something with my mind and produce ideas that eventually flow into action. And so a little bit about me, besides just like where I grew up, did my doctorates in economics and engineering back at Stanford University a couple of years ago, came to Washington, D.C., served on the Council of Economic Advisors, running the cybersecurity, technology, and space activities for a little over a year. Currently, you mentioned some of the affiliations. I also serve as the head of research for the National Artificial Intelligence Institute at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And just, really love creating. And I think what really draws me to education is that it's all about human capital, and that these universities need to be spaces where people are inspired, people are instructed, people are encouraged to do something more than how they came into the university. And that goes for K through 12 as well. I particularly feel more of a calling towards higher ed, but obviously it's important at all levels. And so I guess in brief, it's just seeing how everything that we do comes down to our human capital. What talents are we bringing to the table, and how do we nurture it? Because when you look at big problems throughout the world, when you look at the cure for cancer, when you look at issues of environmental degradation, whatever issue it is, human capital is really the gateway, because you can't solve it without ideas. You can't solve it without individuals banding together. And so I feel like if we can develop good answers on the educational frontier, we essentially create a ripple effect that will solve a lot of other problems. And so I just try to come at that through the kind of intersection of policy and higher ed and research.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So there's a question that you asked on that note of coming at these questions, these problems from different perspectives and using data to gain information and drawing those correlations. You and Corey DeAngelis worked on a particular question. And can you tell us first, what was the question that you guys asked? And I'll post this just so people can have the links to some of this research. I'll start with the research, and then I'll post a couple of links here on the broadcast as well to some papers or op-eds that were written as well. But can you tell us, Christos, what was the question that you asked? And then maybe tell us why. Why was the question important?
Yeah. Well, let me give a tiny bit of an interlude first and just remind myself and everybody that sometimes in PhD programs, people struggle to find research questions. And I always encourage people just to look out in the world. What are policymakers talking about? What are public thought leaders talking about? And so when Corey and I were exchanging just about the state of education and how the pandemic was affecting students and learners and parents, we were looking at this question of school reopenings and seeing how polarized some of those decisions were getting. And we thought to ourselves, it would make sense just to ask the basic question of, are the districts that are deciding not to reopen, is that in any way correlated with coronavirus cases or deaths in those areas? Because if it is, then maybe there's a data-driven reason for their decision not to reopen. And so we tested that out, and we found really no correlation after you control for basic demographic factors. So once you control for age, education, population, you find that there's no correlation between cumulative coronavirus cases or deaths and the decision to reopen. And so then the puzzle was, if it's not cases or deaths, then could it be driven by politics? And so one way that we can proxy for politicization is by looking at unionization. And this goes to research that both Corey and I have done about unions. I wrote a paper in Journal of Law and Economics over a year ago about right to work laws. And so when we were brainstorming this, we decided, okay, wouldn't it make sense just to put in union density, other measures of unionization? And we found that it was just such a robust predictor. No matter what we threw in as a control, unionization always came out as statistically and economically significant. So just, I won't belabor this point, but one thing that others have articulated is that maybe areas with high unionization also just tend to be very Republican. And so what we're capturing isn't unionization, it's just capturing the fact that there's differences in political affiliation. But we controlled for the share of voters in the 2016 election that voted for Trump, and we controlled for it in a very statistically flexible way. And we found that that didn't alter the coefficient estimate that we were getting on unionization. So long story short, I just felt that if people just look around what's happening, there's just so many questions that we could ask. And we just tried to say, what does the data say about this, and why might this be a very political decision? And not surprisingly for some, for like you or Corey or I, it wasn't surprising to find that unionization was highly predictive of the decision to reopen or not.
So this is, you mentioned something in past research, you had used that variable, unionization, and found that it was a predictor. So you had a tip already. You knew you could use that particular attribute to as a control, at least. But you did it. You obviously had suspicions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, especially in education, where we see so many anecdotal pieces of evidence that teacher unions are powerful, and that the leadership of these unions sometimes try to articulate a message that isn't meeting the fact. Just reminiscing about the paper that I'd written in Journal of Law and Economics, it was a paper about how right to work laws affect worker well-being. And the way that I motivated that paper when I was originally presenting it and selling it to academic journal was by saying union leaders say the right to work laws are going to crush freedoms for the actual workers. And so I just wanted to look at the data, and I looked at after state adopts right to work laws, what happens to worker well-being, and specifically what happens to worker well-being among union workers. And I found, contrary to what the union leaders were advocating for, it is actually associated with improvements in worker well-being, and those improvements were concentrated among union workers. So it was kind of like the opposite of the story that they were trying to sell workers. And so as a result, we both, Corey and I, had this intuition about what we might find, and that's what we ended up finding. Obviously, anytime a researcher comes to a question, you always have to have an open mind, but the goal of being open-minded shouldn't stop us from being having an intuition or a hypothesis that drives the empirical specification that we end up taking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as you dug in just initially, what was the connection where you had this previous research that you had worked on that tipped you off to some variables that you could use, and then Corey's work? How did you two connect on that particular issue?
Yeah, well, both of us have worked with some of the same data. So, for example, it's easy to get just a cross-section of what states have right-to-work laws, or looking at union density at a state level, and that's provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Current Population Survey. And so we had already worked with a lot of these very data sets, and so all we needed to do was merge it into a complete data set where the new variables were essentially school reopening decisions. And then I had also worked a lot with Census Bureau data, where you can see at the county level the age distribution or the education distribution. So like what share of the population is between ages 0 and 9, between 10 and 15, and so on. And so these data sets were common. And then we were just thinking, well, we can run this new statistical model and answer this question pretty simply. And so in addition to the op-ed that we wrote in the New York Post, we also wrote a research paper that is slightly more detailed. It's about 30 pages. And hey, Corey, good to see you.
Hey, don't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
yeah, just explaining some of the background to the paper that we wrote, and then the New York Post piece. So anytime that we try to do like a op-ed, it's nice to kind of bolster it with a longer paper that contains all the robustness exercises, all the tables and figures, so that somebody that is maybe a little bit more skeptical can then go through those 30 pages. And so now we have it under review, and hopefully it doesn't take 5 years to get published. By the end of the coronavirus pandemic, it'll be ready. But we're looking forward to hearing the feedback from the journal. So that's how we kind of initially connected on it, and how we got to the model that we ended up writing down.
Awesome.
Hey, it was pretty interesting. Christos, can you go over kind of what you were seeing on Twitter when we first released these results to the public? What was kind of the main takeaway that you saw from social media?
Yeah, well, I mean, like a lot of people were like, this is not surprising. And in one sense, yeah, I mean, to people like us, it certainly wasn't super surprising. But I guess the part that was a little bit surprising was like how robust the result was, and that whether we use state level data, county level data, regardless of how we measure unionization. So if we look at right to work laws, whether we look at union density, whether we use the Ford measure. So like any way that you cut the data, you find this robust result. And then even more so than coronavirus cases. Like maybe somebody would have thought coronavirus cases would be like weakly significant. So in statistical language, significant like a 10% level instead of a 1% level. But so those are sort of the quantitative results that maybe are kind of interesting. You also found maybe some people that were sometimes a little bit more critical and that like say that we're trying to politicize the topic. But I guess to us, it's like it was already politicized, and we were trying to come in as social scientists, as people that try to take data to a wider audience and say, here's what it's saying. But yeah, I think a lot of positive reaction, and it was just fantastic to team up with Corey, somebody that has a heart for taking data and then communicating that to a wider audience. And as I was saying on Twitter earlier today, I just wish that more academics would take up that mantle and not just kind of be satisfied writing a paper that gets like 10 views and calling it a day. Yeah,
well,
Corey, your Twitter, tweets will get like more views than some academics will get like in an entire lifetime. It's a little bit sad, but also inspirational.
Yeah, I mean, what's the joke that academic papers typically only have a couple people reading them? It's reviewer 1 and reviewer 2, and maybe the editor. And then if you've read it yourself too, and hopefully your co-author has read the article as well. But yeah, I mean, that's what makes doing the op-ed so important, and doing the social media aspect so important too, because the work is important and needs to get out to a wider audience. And a lot of times the journal has it behind a paywall, right? And most people are just like, I don't want to pay for that, or it's just real long and technical, and they don't want to go through all of that. People have a limited amount of time to go through all this stuff.
One quick point, Matt, before you go on, is just to emphasize, when we think about businesses are taking a product or service and trying to sell it. And so I think that as educators or as people that are trying to be public intellectuals, we have to take up that responsibility and say, like, people aren't just going to come just because we put something out there. We have to work hard to convince people that it matters. We have to work hard on the framing, on the accessibility, on the way that we disseminate it, meeting where people are, like going to whatever social media platform they're using. So if somebody is on Instagram versus somebody on Twitter and so on. So I just think it's like really our responsibility, and both of you do a great job of it.
That's it. I just found the solution right here, Corey. So Corey is Twitter. He's got it locked down, right? Like, no, and it's basically blue ocean right now. Like, no one else is doing what he's doing in Twitter. But Christos, Instagram is like totally untapped. You're the Instagram guy.
No, I think Corey has Instagram too. I mean, like, I'm trying to find a platform to beat him in, and I'll keep working on it. But no, I mean, just like as a small and serious point, is just like one of the things I really loved was in teaming up with Corey. It just opens up the audience so much, because I like. In reality, like, this is probably one of the papers that I've spent like the least amount of time on, but it like had some of the most traction. And it just shows that when you find the right angle and it's timed with a very policy relevant question, it really has the potential to have a big impact and shape the conversation. So I actually love it. And now as I mentioned earlier, before we went live, Corey and I are talking about a new collaboration, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and this whole project was just super timely, and it was amazing that Education Week had such a big database of nearly 900 school districts in the U.S. and their reopening decisions. So and it was great that you had access to tons of data to control for different demographics in the county area, and we teamed up, and you were probably one of my quickest co-authors. Usually I'm waiting on other people, but it was a pleasure to work with you on this. Did you go and show any of the tables yet? So I pulled some of them up. So like, here's a map if you want to like explain, I don't know, like what this means in layman's terms for the audience, or I mean, this is just pretty much the districts that we included.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be super quick on it, I guess. One of the questions that we had was that even though we have like 900 different districts, we still wanted to understand, is this representative of the United States? Because there's 3,100 something counties in the United States. And so to try to develop an externally valid result from this, we want to see, are the counties that are in our sample systematically different than the counties that we don't have data on? And it is true that it's not fully representative, but we've found that like these counties are larger, they tend to be different in terms of the age distribution. But as long as we can be transparent about what the differences in counties are, I think then we can just provide the reader with as much information. So yeah, that was just counting the number of districts per counties that we have. Table 1 was looking at like a regression for whether or not you're in our sample, and then regressing that on different characteristics. So the way to interpret column 1 here is that a 10% increase in population is is associated with like a 1.1% increase in the probability that you're in our sample. So just showing that there's this positive correlation between counties that are larger and being in our sample. Likewise, counties that have a higher share of males are more likely to be in our sample. Counties that have a younger share of workers under the age of 5 likely to be in our sample. That's important because if we're trying to understand questions of school reopening, you don't want a county that is primarily over the age of 65. You want counties that are under the age of 10 or whatnot. So, yeah.
And this makes sense too. I mean, it looks like it's the bigger counties, and that makes sense because Education Week, when they started this, they started with the bigger school districts is what they were putting together, I think. Yeah.
And one other important point here is like, if you look at white and so on that table one question that's come up a lot over the pandemic is the heterogeneous effects across race. And so the fact that we didn't find statistically significant differences between like the share of African Americans, the share of whites within our sample, tells us that it's not as if our results are biased towards like finding white neighborhoods or black neighborhoods. It did seem to be fairly representative. And also for like the education differences, the fact that we're not talking only about like really well educated or less educated. So I think those were interesting results.
Okay, so I guess for most people, I think they just want to see the results, the main results table. And I guess this is our kind of main results table of 3 different state level teachers union measures. And could you just go through like what this means, for example, for these first 5 columns? You know, we got like non-right to work state and then a negative coefficient. What does all that mean? And why is there like 5 different columns for that one measure, for example, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the short version is that when you're thinking about unionization, there's not a perfect way to proxy for it, but you can just use multiple metrics. And so one metric is to look at whether or not that state has a right to work law, or here we're creating an indicator for whether you don't have a right to work law. And so you would expect that states with right to work give more agency to individuals, to workers, to educators. And so as a result, not having one means that they're probably more likely to stay closed or less likely to reopen. And that's why we're finding that negative coefficient. So column 1 is just looking at the raw correlation. And that's usually what people talk about. And this is one of the things that as listeners, we have to be like really critical. Like, I don't mean critical in like a negative way, but like skeptical sometimes when you hear data quoted to you, because sometimes people just present the raw correlation, but what you sometimes care about more is what's called the conditional correlation. After you control for other factors, coronavirus cases, coronavirus deaths. And so you can see that there's this negative association between deaths and reopenings in column 2. But once you add in county demographics like population, age distribution, education distribution, that correlation vanishes. So like on coronavirus cases and deaths, it goes down to like economically insignificant and statistically significant. The coefficient on the non-right to work state declines in economic magnitude, but it stays economically significant and statistically significant. So what that allows us to say is that no matter like what you're controlling for, even when you control for student enrollments, for median household income, you find this very robust negative association between not having a right to work law and school reopenings. And then the other columns just do the same thing, but they just use different proxies for unionization. So I think this is really our main table that show no matter how you proxy for it, no matter what controls you put in, you find that robust association.
So this is what's cool, for the lay person out there. This is what's cool about actually asking these questions and then digging into the data and putting pencil to paper, right? So there's a big difference between saying, I guarantee you, to your neighbor and sticking your finger in his chest and saying, I guarantee you that unions have got everything to do with these lockdowns and it has nothing to do with coronavirus. I bet you $100. There's a big difference between saying that and saying, well, let's look at the data. Let's see what the data tells us, right? So this is really important. And these are important questions to ask. So someone just made this comment here, and this what made me think of that, right? That the data is important, and it's important that we go through it and understand what's actually driving these decisions, because they affect our lives, right? So anyway, quick aside.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, a lot of the people who agreed with us to begin with, yeah, they kind of mocked the findings at first, or just at least kind of joked about it because, yeah, they were just kind of like, well, of course the unions had something to do with it. We saw it in the news. We saw that they were fighting to keep schools closed, but that doesn't really tell us. We don't really know without looking into the data if places with stronger teachers unions are actually getting what they want. Yes, they could be calling for things, but it doesn't mean that, you know, it could be that places without teachers unions are still remaining closed, but that's not what the data are suggesting. It's based on these 4 measures, places with stronger teachers unions are less likely to reopen in person, which is what we theorized. And yeah, it's important to look at the size of the relationships and just also after seeing if it's robust to controlling for different characteristics, and which is what we found.
One of my favorites, by the way, of those snarky comments that came back, like, oh yeah, you know, like how important was it for us to understand better the mating habits of quail?
Oh,
it's like it's like, yeah, we all know, we get it. Like, you didn't have to go and study that. We already know what's going on. I thought it was funny. But
yeah, and I mean the important point here, I think, is that you know, unions are a powerful force when it comes to K through 12 education policy, and you know, they're arguing for a particular position, and I think that is to minimize the costs at all possible for their members while retaining the same benefits of job security and pay. And they could even be reducing, you know, the costs associated with driving to work and having to provide with childcare activities. But the problem is teachers aren't the only stakeholders in the K through 12 education system. The families and their children are stakeholders too. And so while it's okay for, you know, teachers unions to fight for whatever they want to fight for, families need to be able to have a choice too. And so I think this is a really good argument for, you know, what we talk about very often on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast, which is educational freedom. The money should follow the child to wherever they get an education. So if you're, you know, we don't really go into in the paper and say whether the unions are lobbying for something good or lobbying for something bad. We're just saying that it looks like the unions are getting what they want and that the schools are not reopening in person. But we don't make any value judgments as to whether that's a good or bad thing. But at the same time, if it's not a good thing for a particular family, the family should be able to vote with their feet essentially away from a policy that's not working for their individual child.
Right. Yeah, and I know we're probably coming close to the end of time, but one really quick point that I just want to drive home is that there's a lot of things that look like solutions on the surface, but they're really just kicking the can down the road. So if the unions are going to come out and say, let's delay, you have to ask the question, how are they using the extra time that they now have? How are they re-educating their own teachers? How are they overhauling the infrastructure to create an investment so that everybody is more ready to handle whatever the challenges are down the road? If all that happens is you delay something, then the stakeholders, then the children, the parents are adversely affected, and it doesn't really benefit the educators anymore because then their skills, their habits are atrophying. And so I just think so many times in public policy, we kind of settle for a piece of cake rather than like the protein, the steak, the whatever, choose your source of protein that would actually be good. And it's just really important that we think about the long run implications of every policy decision instead of just like what's comfortable for the next 3 months or the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Excellently well said. Did you guys see what happened in New York City today with the mayor making a decision with the unions at the table, literally at the table, doing this press conference with de Blasio today? They pushed back the start date of the New York City public schools for in-person instruction for all students again. They had already pushed it back to, you know, like the 21st or whatever. It was supposed to be Monday, but now it's not going to be Monday anymore for a large number of students. So again, yeah, I mean, we keep seeing things in the news about the unions pressuring the districts. to not reopen in person. And in this particular exchange today, I think de Blasio came to an agreement with the unions to hire 4,500 more staff for the school system, yet they're still not reopening in person when they were supposed to. And then a reporter asked, well, is 4,500 going to be the right number when it comes to, is that going to be it? And then de Blasio is sitting there and he's kind of like, yeah, I think so. We all talked about this for a long time. And then the union rep chimed in after that and said, oh, well, actually, we might need some more. We might need some more staff. Because the 4,500 was for the elementary schools, and we still got to talk about what we're going to do with the high schools. So right. Like right after de Blasio said, I think we're at a good place, the union member literally chimed in right after he said that to say, oh, no, we're not. We're still going to get more from the taxpayer. I mean, because thousands of more teachers mean a lot more dues for the union bosses.
Yeah.
So let me ask you guys this question, because I think this has been interesting to watch, and I don't know that everyone knows this. I've been paying attention closer to this, but this research that you guys did and the accompanying op-eds that have gone out have resulted in more exposure for your research. Where else is this going to end up, or what's in the works right now with this research?
Christos, you want to get it? I don't know if we're allowed to share that information publicly yet. But if you think I think it's cool. We've had people contact us, so if you want to go over.
Fair enough.
Well, I think it's okay to say who's kind of inquired about it. So we've talked to people from New York Times who are thinking about doing a graphic relating the union variables to reopening decisions. The Economist, we've talked to someone from them, from their outlet, and they're interested in creating a graph as well with the data. And then also we've spoken with Ballotpedia about doing the same thing. So those are three outlets that might amplify the findings further. But then also Tyler Cowen shared our study on his blog, Marginal Revolution. And so he's a great voice, academic voice in the conversation too. So we were both glad that he shared our work as well.
Yeah. So it's like you guys are like, you made it to TMZ, right? Like, but in the social science world, you get into the Economist, and it's like, if you were a celebrity, you just made it to TMZ, right? You're on the front page. I just think it's cool.
Yeah, I think the big thing is just like, I mean, what we care a lot about, and what motivates me whenever I write a paper, is just what is the best platform to get an idea out, because everything that we do needs to be about pursuing truth and like helping to shed light about how the world works. And so what sometimes bothers me is like there's a lot of fluff that gets out there in the press, and when good ideas don't get out there, and I think this is a good idea, but I mean, like if it was somebody else that wrote it and not me, if it was just Corey, I mean, it would be a good idea either way. And so, I mean, we just care about getting truth out there. And so if the Economist ends up covering it, or New York Times, or whoever it is, it'd be a blessing, just because I think people need to understand like what are the different forces at play, so that we can hold whatever entities more accountable, because the lack of knowledge is what drives down competition. But when there's transparency, when we bring light to darkness, it just adds a lot more innovation and competition within the marketplace.
Yep. I think it's very cool. When I heard those, what was coming, I thought it was super cool. And for the reasons that you just said, not just because it's the Economist, but for the reach that they have, right? And getting ideas out. So I think it's awesome that people are reaching it. And what it does is it says that the ideas that you guys pursued, the questions that you guys asked are important. They're important enough. And not just in a moment's time, right? Obviously, it's in the news cycle, and yes, there is that. But this is an important question even beyond coronavirus. It's an important question about the influence of unions on public policy decisions. And we all kind of know that back here in the back of our minds, that yes, of course, the largest union in the country, or trade union, certainly if you add up the two, they're huge, right? AFT and the NEA, they're gigantic. So we know that they have influence, but in what ways and to what degree? It's a great question to ask, and you guys just killed it. You guys did a great job asking that question and pulling in data to back it up.
And I want to point out that we're not the only people that have found that there isn't a statistical relationship between COVID risk as measured by cases per capita and reopening decisions. The first place that I saw put these data together was Brookings Institution. John Vallant, senior fellow over at Brookings, found the same thing, that recent COVID cases per capita in the county were not statistically related to reopening decisions, but he did find a link between kind of the Trump voter share from the 2016 election. And in this piece, he kind of goes over some of those correlations, which when I first saw this, I was thinking, yeah, politics could play a role too, but it's probably more likely that unions have a strong influence over these on the ground decisions, because they're the ones actively bargaining with the individual school districts. So that kind of got us to pursue this project. And we also controlled for the political affiliation of people living in the area in our study as well. And then we included so many more variables that Christos had access to. So
awesome. Cool. Well, we've Corey, you joined us late.
Yeah, sorry about that. Dude, I've been after yesterday, man. I just no work today, pretty much. It was so stressful. For anybody, preparing for debates, just a stressful endeavor. But,
Yep.
So I'm sure my opponent also had a chill day today because of so much stress.
For different reasons, though, right? Because you totally took him behind the woodshed.
Oh, don't be mean. He was a very nice guy.
I'm sure he's a nice guy. You won. End of story. Okay, so anyway,
Corey is so respectful, and it's perfect. Matt's it's a good cop, bad cop. Matt will be the bad cop, but
yeah, no, I don't mind. I don't mind doing that. But anyway, so we went over Corey, and we gave you a grace period. Totally, you get a pass for that. By the way, I just want to say we're glad you got here at all, honestly, because
I saw you calling, and I was like, oh, wait, Matthew. Oh, and then you're texting me we're live, dude. We're live. I'm looking on my calendar, and I was editing another article for this this journal called Educational Review. They need, how they go through the production process, and they're line here, all these queries and stuff. So I was going through those, and then I kind of looked down and I see that you guys are doing this. I don't know. I totally missed it, but whatever.
You're good.
Everybody gets a free pass once in a while, right?
That's right. I missed the last week with Dan Bishop. I was bummed about that, but so anyway, what we did, Corey, is right at the outset, we talked about what prompted the question that you guys posed in the research, and then how you guys kind of teamed up, and that's where you came in. We'd gotten that far. Any other questions that, Corey, you can think of that would help kind of tell the story on the data or on the question that you guys asked? Or Christos, anything from your perspective as we kind of wrap? We usually go for an hour. We covered a lot of ground really fast. You guys were super efficient on that, and that's the economist coming out of you guys. So appreciate that. But yeah, Corey, anything else you want to mention to our viewers?
Well, Christos, if you want to kind of, I don't know if you want to kind of give a preview to the next research question you were thinking about. If you don't, if you want to keep that under wraps, that's cool too. But if you want to give anybody a hint on that, that's cool. Or if you want to talk, kind of talk about other projects that you're thinking about working on, that would be cool too.
Yeah. So I guess I think there's one really actionable topic that we're probably going to pursue in the upcoming week or two around if it is the case that schools are going to delay their reopening decisions even further, then what is the implication for parents? Because if parents have to then go out and spend more money on childcare, and especially as we want to get the economy back open, so if people are going to be going back to work, the children either have to be in school or they have to be in childcare, or the parents have to stay back home from work. And so this is essentially shifting the burden more onto the parents, and that means disposable income that you have that's going towards these extra costs that normally would just be part of the public funds that our taxes go to. And so it's trying to understand how the what are the implications for these different stakeholders. And just as Corey mentioned earlier, that while we didn't take a stance in this paper about the normative implications, what we might be able to do now is quantify from a positive perspective, just from a data perspective, what these extra costs incurred are on parents, because we have some really high frequency data from a company called MC that measures the universe of online job postings down to the county level. We might aggregate up to the state level, but we can see at a county by day level what are all the different job postings within early care and education. So we can separate across like school job postings versus like preschool or whatever it might be. And so that's probably what's most on the docket. And then more generally, just trying to understand what the implications for human capital development are of these education policy decisions, because everything comes at a cost. It's nothing like things that it's just like the law of entropy. Energy doesn't just like disappear. And so we think that some of these policy decisions will have consequences, even if we don't see them in like 3 months. They will have a generational effect on these children. And so the more that we can shed light on what these effects could be, the more we might be able to shape the decision making of policymakers so that we stop a bad decision in its tracks and prevent something really disastrous from happening.
Yeah, so the basic long story short is that families are getting screwed because the schools aren't reopening, because now they have to pay for childcare expenses out of pocket, whereas before they were already paying for that through the property tax system, and now the schools aren't in many places, providing that service and for now. And I guess the main theory, right, is that in places that reopen the schools for in-person learning, we should see less of a demand for outside childcare services. Is that kind of the basic theory?
Yeah.
Which is an economic harm, right? Because, and it's a big one, and it's a national one, and it's, I'm sure, international. But yeah, these decisions. So it's an interesting next step, right, in the progression from the first question that you asked in the paper that's been released to the next question. Well, what does that mean now for the economy and for the education economy, for whether it's public or private, right? The childcare, all of those services. Those are important questions to ask. So it's a good next step. It's a logical next step in that progression of questions that you can ask about the situation.
Yeah. Do you want to take that?
So no, I mean, it's that's true, Matthew. That's a good point. And Christos, where can people follow your work? And so if you want to share your Twitter handle and other outlets. Maybe a Social Science Research Network profile, or where should people go?
Yeah, so my website is christosmakridis.com, which is just CHRISTOSMAKRIDIS.com. And then my Twitter is just CA Makridis, so CAMAKRIDIS. And happy to connect with people there. I just have a huge passion for creating and for producing ideas and then disseminating them from whatever platform, whether it's like an op-ed, whether it's social media or whatnot. So always open for feedback and ideas that people want to write about. I've got a Forbes column, so it gives an easy way to disseminate to a larger audience that way as well.
Awesome.
Cool. I'm posting in the comments for everybody watching live right now. If you want to give him a follow, I'm just sharing the Twitter right now. And then I think you have your personal website listed on your Twitter too. So that's great.
Hey, real quick before we bail, let's answer this question because do you want to take that, Christos?
Yeah, I don't have that stat on the top of my head, but we could easily compute it. So maybe that's something that we can just put on Twitter tonight and look at what the results. We'll get the latest data from the Johns Hopkins website, and yeah, that'd be interesting because I think the reason why you're probably asking that, Don, is like if there really is a concern about reopening, then you would expect to see a surge in cases there. However, a lot of public health professionals, I'm thinking one gentleman that I really admire and love, his name is Jay Bhattacharya at Stanford, has written about the fact that children don't really transmit the virus, and the scientific work on that is actually very strong. And so we personally don't expect to see like a surge in cases in those areas, but that's something that we'll be able to verify or validate.
Yeah. So in our study, we used the lagging indicator of COVID before the reopening decision and see if that would predict their reopening decision. So I guess Dawn is asking, after they reopened, will we see
what happened
afterwards? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we haven't looked at that yet. That'll be interesting to look at, though.
Okay.
It'll give us good content for another series of tweets.
Yeah,
that's right. Hey, this has been awesome, Christos. We really appreciate you coming on and taking some time out of your afternoon to talk about the research that you and Corey did. It's really interesting. It's interesting stuff because these are things that, and it's relevant because these are things that people say offhand that like, I have this kind of nagging feeling that this isn't actually data driven. And then you go in and you dig in and you say, actually, it's not, or actually it is. Just that verification piece is so important. And we appreciate you guys doing the dirty work, getting in with the numbers and
Mostly him.
keep those regressions.
This sort of stuff is like super simple. Like if you do this stuff 24/7, like I do. Well, not exactly 24/7, but if you do it,
pretty much. Anytime I texted you, you're ready to go and run some more analysis.
Yeah. Well, it's my pleasure. Yeah, the broader point to just relay to the audience is like we all have we have a lot of brain power, and so while each of us might not be like a statistician, there are answers out there, and we can be creative with data and piecing things together. And so even if you can't be the one that executes on it, there's nothing stopping you from like reaching out to somebody that can have the answer. And yeah, it's a fantastic comment that just came in about good scholarship creating a foundation, because you can't have good policy. Like even if you're right about something, if you don't understand the why behind what you're right, you're not going to be a good evangelist for that idea. So being able to articulate the why is a prerequisite to having like a society that really can flourish. So yeah, it's our pleasure, Matt, and just like grateful for you as well for bringing people together and just fostering conversation about such a wide array of topics.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you both. Corey, anything you want to wrap up?
That's it. Yeah, I just want to say thanks again for everybody coming out and watching another episode of the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. We're looking forward to having our next guest next week, so stay tuned.